The Crysis series began with high praise from critics and fans alike, and as the years passed, Crytek continued to put out new entries, each game with a lower score than the last, leading the franchise on a downward trajectory that ultimately ended in 2013 with Crysis 3. By no means is the 76 average score the game garnered bad, but it's a far cry from the universal acclaim earned by the original Crysis. Despite being more visually stunning than ever, its high polygon environments and industry-leading facial animation couldn't save it from a score that would fail to impress anyone, really. Although I would consider myself a Crysis fan, by the fourth game in the series I was pretty checked out. Seeing how Crysis 3 reviewed and having limited funds as a high schooler meant that I was saving my money for next month when BioShock Infinite dropped. I certainly wasn't alone among Crysis fans, as sales for Crysis 3 disappointed both EA, the game's publisher, and Crytek's CEO and game director, Sva Yarly. There's no specific data out there regarding the total units sold, but the fact Crysis 3 killed any future developments in the series is not a good sign. It wasn't until 2024 and making this video that I sat down and played all the way through Crysis 3. To be honest, it's pretty damn good. I was actually kind of impressed. Crysis 3 shines as it takes the best of the original Crysis and smashes it together with Crysis 2. This is exactly what the developers were going for. It's literally the top objective on a slide that they were giving in a presentation. I felt this fusion permeate every cell of Crysis 3. The wide linear sandbox that everyone loves is back from Crysis 1, but set in New York, the stomping grounds of Crysis 2. The city is not the same anymore though. It's become somewhat of a post-apocalyptic zone, flooded, largely abandoned, and overgrown with lush grass. It visually represents the harmony the developers found between Crysis 1 and 2. So that all sounds great, but what went wrong? Well, as I go through each part of the game, I'll dissect it more, but Crysis 3 had several constraints plaguing it. Looking at its production compared to the previous entry helps paint the picture. Crysis 2 was developed in 38 months by 150 people. Crysis 3 was made in 23 months by a team of 100. During the final entry's development, Crytek was expanding as a company and divesting its staff into more projects. I also want to acknowledge Crysis 2 may have been more technically challenging and required more staff, as it was the first game shipped on the brand spanking new CryEngine 3, which was the first iteration to support 7th generation consoles. Now with that history lesson out of the way, let's dive into the game's lore. First, I want to briefly refresh our memory on what happened in Crysis 2. The second numbered entry in the series takes place several years after the original game. Here, we saw Lawrence Barnes, also known as Prophet, transplant the Nanosuit 2, the most advanced piece of military tech on the planet, onto the playable character, Alcatraz. One of Crysis 2's most important aspects is discovering the Nanosuit as a semi-organic hybrid of the technology from humans and the aliens known as Ceph. This allows the wearer to interface with the Ceph and their machines. Throughout the duration of Crysis 2's campaign, the Nanosuit evolves even further via the use of Ceph DNA and wholly assimilates Alcatraz within. After managing to save New York City from a massive biological attack conducted by the Ceph, the imprint of Prophet on the Nanosuit takes over as the dominant personality, leaving Alcatraz as a ghost in the suit. At the very end of the game, our playable character acknowledges his identity as Prophet and is contacted by one of the Nanosuit's creators and key Crynet member, Carl Ernest Rosch. From here, there's nearly a quarter of a century jump in the timeline from the end of Crysis 2 to where Crysis 3 picks up in 2047. The novel Crysis Escalation fills in some of the gaps in this 24-year time skip, but by no means is a mandatory reading. The book primarily elaborates on the beginning of this time skip, where Prophet is trekking around the globe, fighting the Ceph, and Cell, Crynet's private military group. In 2025, Prophet finds himself in Siberia fighting Cell with fan-favorite character Psycho. Unfortunately, things go poorly for the pair as they're captured by Cell. Prophet remains locked up by Cell for 22 years, all while being haunted by visions of mass destruction. It just so happens that the Ceph, who we've fought over 3 games at this point, are a hive mind race. None of the games or accessory media really hinted at this, and Crysis 3 just casually states it near the start of the game like we knew all along.
Maybe you're right. They're behaving like animals. No hive intelligence. So where's the Alpha Ceph?
At the center of this hive mind is the Alpha Ceph, a being most don't believe exists, yet Prophet warns is the true threat.
Cell are not the real threat to our world. The most powerful alien, the Alpha Ceph, still lives.
Crysis 3 picks up in 2047, with Psycho and his allies working to free Prophet from Cell in hopes of obtaining a trump card against them. Before getting too lost in the weeds with the story, I want to take a look at the gameplay design and systems of Crysis 3. At the heart of every Crysis game is the play how you like mentality. The choreographed sandbox of Crysis 2 was perhaps too limited in its scope to really let this core tenet shine. In Crysis 3, this design philosophy works better than ever before, with smart tweaks that encourage you to find a playstyle you enjoy. Crysis 3 feels more like an immersive sim than its predecessors due to its level design and introduction of new mechanics like hacking. As always, the key element to the play how you like design is the Nanosuit, and in this iteration, you'll feel more powerful than ever before in it. The core functionality of the Nanosuit hasn't changed much since Crysis 2. The suit's modes remain the same with Cloak mode, Power mode, Armor mode, and Visor mode. The two most distinct modes here are Cloak and Armor, as once they're invoked, you'll remain in them until you turn the mode off or run out of energy. Power mode was introduced in Crysis 2 as a combination of strength and speed mode from Crysis and Crysis Warhead. This function cannot be switched into like the two aforementioned modes, but can still be utilized in bursts, helping you jump higher or throw enemies further off buildings. Sprinting has changed though. It's no longer considered an invocation of power mode and doesn't burn energy as a result. This is a welcome change as it encourages players to move around the battlefield more and in a swifter manner, which is important as a cover system seen in Crysis 2 is abandoned here. It's worth noting that cloaked energy usage is still tied to your movement speed, so don't expect to run across the whole map while invisible. With the size and scope of Crysis 3 levels being a bit closer to that of Crysis 1, the extra mobility from free sprinting allows you to get around them in a reasonable amount of time. Visor or Tactical is the final mode, but it's kind of in a category of its own. Using the suit's visor doesn't consume any energy and acts like a pair of smart binoculars, which allows you to identify and track enemies and shows you points of interest. You can still invoke the infrared nanovision as well, which will consume energy. The mode functions nearly identically to how it was used in Crysis 2, but it's more important now due to how large areas can be. The abundance of thick foliage can also obscure enemies from normal view, so using Visor mode can help locate them. The standout new feature of the Visor is its ability to hack into electronics and certain enemies. I didn't anticipate this mechanic, however it's a welcome addition. Hacking is often used for mundane tasks like completing story objectives or opening weapon caches. However, it's also used for some great things, like opening new routes in the environment and creating some chaos among the enemies. Thankfully, the minigame associated with hacking is fast and easy to execute. While I love Bioshock's tile rearranging hacking minigame, it wouldn't have fit in here. The developers nailed it with a simple and fast minigame that doesn't interrupt the flow of combat too much. Another new feature of the Nanosuit is its ability to overcharge using Ceph power sources. Overcharging briefly turns you into an unstoppable killing machine, which is very handy during difficult fights.
I'm not taking damage.
The best change for the Nanosuit in Crysis 3 is how it overhauls the upgrade system. Suit upgrades were introduced in Crysis 2 and made sense from a lore standpoint given the events in that game. This progression system allowed you to tailor Prophet a bit more to your playstyle, yet only allowed players to pick one upgrade related to a specific function of the suit. With Crysis 3, it's easier to focus on particular functions of the Nanosuit. You can prepare to be a full stealth assassin by seeing enemies' footprints and staying invisible for longer. Or if stealth isn't your thing, you can greatly enhance Prophet's durability instead. Playstyle experimentation is also encouraged more as upgrade loadouts can be saved. At any moment, you can simply open the menu and swap to another upgrade set with zero wait time. Each of these upgrades contains its own experience meter, which tracks your mastery of it. Once mastered, upgrades become even more powerful. Crysis 3 lets you live out the power fantasy of the Nanosuit more than any other entry. The Nanosuit was always powerful, but was restricted enough in Crysis and Crysis Warhead that you still felt vulnerable in it. Crysis 2 brought about the advent of the Nanosuit 2.0 and marked a distinct change in how it felt to operate the suit. Utilizing its features became more seamless while depth was still provided through progression systems. Crysis 3 stays the course set by its forebearer while adding more depth and refining its systems. Weapons and their customization are another key aspect in the identity of Crysis, and I don't know if you can find any piece of promotional art for Crysis 3 without Prophet wielding the new Predator bow. This weapon is introduced in the first level of the game, and it's extremely fun to use, and probably a bit overpowered.
That was a bit messy. Maybe you need this.
A bow?
Yeah, makes you an invisible, silent killing machine. Serious kit this. You like it?
No.
Well, that's because you haven't heard the good part. Carbon lasers map that bow to your nanosuit. It has enough kinetic energy to stop a rhino dead. With interchangeable heads, you can drop an explosive charge on any target. And best of all, you stay cloaked. You like it now?
I'm coming around.
I find the idea of this godlike nanosuit being wielding a compound bow as his weapon of mass destruction to be pretty funny. The Predator bow never leaves your inventory during your journey, and ammo caches for it are distinct from other weapons. Like nearly every other weapon featured in Crysis 3, the bow can be customized on the fly. Its customization allows you to change the draw weight of the bow and the type of arrow you'll fire. This makes the Predator bow one of the most flexible weapons in the game. It's perfectly suited for dispatching all enemy types due to its 4 arrows. The bow works great in action-packed scenarios, but where it really excels is in stealth. If you're familiar with the Crysis games, you'll know using the cloak mode and firing a weapon will drain a small amount or all of the suit's energy depending on the gun and its configuration. The Predator bow does not suffer this drawback, and any of its arrows can be fired from cloak without the use of energy. This fact alone makes the bow overpowered. It's also capable of one-shotting most enemies with its standard arrows. The biggest downside of the bow is its small ammo pool for exotic arrow types. However, standard arrows can be retrieved from the bodies of your enemies. It seems entirely possible to do a whole playthrough using nothing but the bow, and I wouldn't blame anyone for doing so as it's so damn fun. Besides the Predator bow, the weapon arsenal is like that seen in Crysis 2. Many weapons like the Grendel, Scarab, and K-Volt make their return. Later in the game, there's also the FY-71M, which is a fun callback to the most customizable gun from the first Crysis. Most firearms in Crysis 3 are categorized as standard or special weapons, with each category having a specific ammo cache to resupply it. My favorite new gun was probably the Typhoon, a special category gun which features an incredibly high rate of fire and sounds like a swarm of angry hornets when fired. The customization of standard and special firearms is improved over Crysis 2. Just like in the past, new weapon attachments and modifications are acquired from picking up enemies' weapons. Unique ammo configurations are a larger focus this time around though. The Grendel assault rifle can be swapped from its normal bullets to armor-piercing rounds, and shotguns offer the most variety in usable ammunition outside of the Predator bow, as it can fire buckshot, solid slugs, or electric rounds. Damage types are also more important than before. I could spend forever shooting a turret emplacement or a Ceph Scorcher with an assault rifle and they'd eventually go down, but fighting either with electric ammo instead makes the battle much easier. There's plenty of fun weapons to use this time around, but many of the most unique and powerful ones are only usable in the later levels of the game. The most significant change to the arsenal of Crysis 3 is the introduction of usable Ceph weaponry. Previously in Crysis 1, Ceph weaponry was employed against them in very specific sequences, but now you're free to use their weapons as you like, even if it freaks your allies out a bit.
My God, what the hell is he doing? He can interface with Ceph weaponry? Did you know about this, Michael? How far gone is he?
There's 5 Ceph guns in total, and each feature 2 distinct firing modes, making them an even greater joy to wield. These are extremely powerful weapons that can wreak havoc on hordes of enemies, yet they're constrained by their limited ammo. It's best to use these weapons in difficult fights, then ditch them once the job is done. While the enhanced and expanded arsenal adds a new dimension of gameplay to Crysis 3, the cast of characters is quite constrained. Previously, Crysis 2 introduced a host of new characters, with the standout being the elusive Crynet co-founder, Jacob Hargrave. Given the large jump in time since the end of Crysis 2, it makes sense the new characters featured in that game have spread out and moved on. Notably, Nathan Gould, one of your main collaborators in Crysis 2, is nowhere to be seen or heard from. Tara Strickland, on the other hand, has become a US Senator and can be briefly heard on the radio. The only character from the franchise's past in Crysis 2 was Prophet, and he was kind of a unique case because our playable character was transitioning to be him. With Prophet's personality being fully adopted by Crysis 3, our playable character here is the chattiest protagonist yet. And to complement Prophet, Psycho is back after his absence in Crysis 2. Prophet and Psycho always shared a dynamic relationship, as Psycho was never afraid to butt heads with his then commanding officer. The two have great chemistry, often shooting petty remarks at one another.
You want a hand?
No. Piss off.
Despite tensions often flaring up between the two, they always work things out and overcome their differences to focus on the larger picture.
It can't be that simple.
It really is, mate. You kill the power, you kill Cell. As simple as you like.
No, the Alpha Ceph showed me a vision. We've been through this before. There's got to be a connection somehow.
Prophet, the aliens are gone. You finished them off yourself, just a few waifs and strays left.
No, there's something more. If we can just find a hint, somewhere here, a clue.
Listen, while you were off hunting some super alien that didn't even exist, Cell were busy taking over the world. We need you back in the here and now, boss. We need you to help us stop Cell.
There's more than your revolution going on here. I've seen this. Cell are toying with powers they can't begin to understand. Whatever they're doing, it's going to bring about the end of the world. We have to shut them down.
Fucking right we do. Let's get moving.
Psycho no longer bears a nanosuit as it was skinned from him while he was held captive by Cell. This drives him for most of the game as he's thirsty for vengeance. Without the nanosuit, Psycho struggles to keep up with Prophet, and the game makes it clear he's much older and no longer as capable as before.
Simple.
He remains a top-tier soldier, but the loss of his super soldier status has clearly dealt a blow to his confidence.
You hear that, you bastards? Yeah, I'll try you all on, yeah, come on! Let's have
Are you insane? Those guns will rip you apart.
so now you get the picture. They took my nanosuit, Prophet. I'm human.
Human? You know how much I've sacrificed to stop the Ceph? How do I get that back?
Outside our returning leads, there's only two other characters of note, with Resistance leader Claire and Nanosuit developer and Jacob Hargreaves' counterpart Carl Ernest Roche. As a biologist by training, Claire fears she's not well suited to leading the Cell Resistance, but Psycho helps assure her there's no one who could do better. Psycho also lets it slip that their relationship is one of an intimate nature, which marks the first romance of any Crysis game. Initially, Claire is skeptical regarding Prophet's involvement with the Resistance, and flat out refuses to acknowledge our protagonist is even human.
What the? Oh no. No.
Claire, this is Prophet, my CO from...
Look at the modifications, Michael. Is it Seth? Cell? Is it even human? Have we been sacrificing good people for that mutation?
Look.
This is not just a suit, Michael.
She only warms up to him once it's clear he's their only shot at saving humanity from mass extinction. There's also foreshadowing around her character, as she does her best to keep Psycho away from the Cell skinning labs. With Psycho dead set on revenge, he pushes forward regardless and learns it was in fact Claire who skinned him from his suit.
What's this?
Michael, you shouldn't. Don't.
Why not?
It won't help.
Operation. The nanosuit is then fully removed. Subject 8A, Sergeant Michael Sykes, is still functioning at near optimal levels, but accelerated degradation is to be expected.
You did this to me.
Michael, please listen to me. You are the reason why. I mean, I fight Cell because of you.
Is
Because...
that why you cared? Or were you pretending to care because of this? Because of your own fucking guilt?
I didn't have a choice, Michael! The Cell program, we were in debt, you know how this works. I was forced to do this. To all of those people. I had to listen to their screams day after day after day. I know what I did. Jesus, believe me, I know. And I'll have to carry that with me as long as I live. Every day of my life.
Carl Roche is a smaller presence overall than Claire, and although he's interesting, he pales in comparison to his business partner, Jacob Hargreave, who is prominently featured in Crysis 2. To be fair though, the two play very different roles. Carl is also surrounded by an aura of mystery, and by 2047, the man's well over 100 years old.
Major Lawrence Barnes. The Prophet. Karl Ernst Rasch. At your service.
Rash, I remember you.
Hold still, please. Recombinant DNA. Human. Ceph. Synthetic. Incredible.
I can't get a read on you.
Oh, come now, Lawrence. What did you expect? I designed your suit, my dear fellow. Of course, it can't get a read on me.
He gets little screen or radio time, and in his last encounter, he's possessed by the Alpha Ceph. It's foreshadowed minutes before the event takes place, but I was seriously concerned the game was going to pull some shenanigans like Carl was the Alpha Ceph all along. Fortunately, it doesn't play out that way, and Carl's simply vulnerable to the Alpha Ceph's influence due to the Ceph technology he's used to prolong his life. The performances of all major characters are fantastic, and aided greatly by the improved facial modeling and animation featured in Crysis 3.
Well, I don't know about you, but I call that fucking flawless.
Throughout the experience, I was impressed with how well these characters held up visually and how well their actors delivered their lines. I also think that focusing on a smaller, tighter-knit cast benefits the story of Crysis 3, which is comparatively simple to the one seen in Crysis 2. Cell is responsible for the alliance formed by these characters, and it's time to dive into the private military contractor. The group falsely claimed responsibility for the cleansing of New York City of the Ceph at the end of Crysis 2, allowing their influence to swell within the US government. By 2047, Cell constructed the NYC Liberty Dome, a giant structure intended to contain and cull local Ceph, and where old Crysis 3 unfolds. Nanodomes just like this were put up on Ceph sites all around the world and allowed Cell to be the only group capable of recovering the aliens' technology. Within the NYC Liberty Dome is the Alpha Ceph, the center of Ceph intelligence that Cell managed to capture in Tunguska. The PMC was able to harness the being's energy, granting them an infinite power source. With this, they became the largest energy supplier in the world and gained a stranglehold over global infrastructure. With their monopoly over energy in effect, Cell began raising prices on electricity, forcing many into debt. These debtors were then forced into indentured servitude for the company, as was previously seen with Claire. Although Cell is a massively wealthy company, they were unable to construct new nanosuits despite their best efforts. Nanosuits were developed by Hargreave Rush Biomedical, which is the parent company of Cell. Before Cell could seize the research pertaining to nanosuits, Carl Ernst Roche had it destroyed and was removed from the company. Cell was hungry for this technology and resorted to reverse engineering existing nanosuits by skinning them off active users like Psycho. Even with all their resources, it seems Cell was ultimately unable to recreate even one suit. Now, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with this, as a nanosuit is clearly a very advanced piece of kit, but maybe the writers forgot that in Crysis 1, the North Korean army was able to develop nanosuits of their own. Not just one either, they seem to have quite a few. These knockoff suits aren't on par with the authentic ones, but they were still very powerful. Given that by Crysis 3, a couple decades had passed and Cell had direct access to Ceph technology and skin nanosuits, it seems inconsistent that they weren't able to achieve their goal. On the other hand, it's impressive that Cell managed to capture the Alpha Ceph, as the creature is massive in stature and extraordinarily powerful. Prophet inadvertently frees the Alpha Ceph while shutting down the Cell power grid.
Prophet, you okay?
Yeah.
That was fucking awesome! We've done it!
No, we haven't. System X, their energy source, was the Alpha Ceph.
Oh, fuck me. If your visions are real, does that mean it's end of the world time?
As the Alpha emerges, all other Ceph regain their intelligence and the situation goes south fast. Crysis 3 largely follows the template laid out in the previous games, where human enemies are primarily fought in the first half and Ceph are fought in the second half. There are a couple new types of Ceph here, and the boss fights with the Mastermind and Alpha are the standouts. The Ceph Stalkers were also among the most interesting enemies to fight, as they do a great job hiding in tall grass, waiting for the right moment to strike. Crysis 3 goes into the most depth regarding the Ceph, and I'm glad it elaborates on the difference between the Ceph seen in Crysis 1 and Warhead to the ones seen in Crysis 2 and 3. The The Ceph originate from the distant M33 galaxy and have been planning to colonize Earth in a 3-stage process. During Crysis and Crysis Warhead, Stage 1 Ceph were deployed. During the first stage, Ceph are dependent on their mothership and are primarily concerned with gathering energy. The nuclear attack launched against them at the end of Crysis provided the Ceph enough energy to create the Alpha Ceph, a central intelligence for the hive mind on Earth. Throughout the events of Crysis 2, the Alpha Ceph had been awakened but was not an active participant in combat. At this point, the Ceph had progressed to Stage 2. This new iteration of Ceph mimics the dominant species of the planet and uses their DNA and military tactics to employ a successful takeover. Things didn't go as planned for the Ceph, as Prophet and Cell were able to neutralize their colonization efforts. This is where the Alpha Ceph hits the failsafe in Crysis 3 and initiates Stage 3 of the invasion. Stage 3 involves opening a wormhole between the M33 galaxy and their target planet. The wormhole allows the massively more advanced warrior Ceph to travel from the Overhive to turn the tides of war. Datalogs theorize these Stage 3 Ceph have hundreds of millions of years of combat evolution and are akin to gods. The Alpha Ceph is the final boss of Crysis 3, but the visions it gave Prophet are that of a Stage 3 Ceph emerging from a wormhole. Fortunately for Prophet, after fighting the Alpha Ceph, he ended up in orbit and right next to Cell's orbital superweapon, Archangel. No matter their size, Prophet proves he was born to hunt Ceph and single-handedly ends Stage 3 of the invasion with a swift and decisive strike. Crysis 3 leans more heavily into the sci-fi than any of the 3 previous games. However, some of the mystery that drove those entries is lacking here. In Crysis 1, the mystery of the Ceph was fresh and pushed you through the game, and in Crysis 2, the enigmatic Jacob Hargrave was alluring enough to see the story through to its conclusion. Crysis 3 has a simple setup: stop Cell and kill the Alpha Ceph. It takes a few levels for other characters to believe in Prophet, but once the big bad shows up, it's largely a hunt to take the beast down. The game's also noticeably shorter than Crysis 1 or 2. Every Crysis game has you confronting a world-threatening catastrophe, yet the scope of what's seen in Crysis 3 is undoubtedly the largest. Despite this, the choreographed Hollywood-esque nature of Crysis 2 did lead to many moments there feeling more dramatic than those encountered in the series finale. The trade-off for more open levels in Crysis 3 was certainly worth it though. Much of the nuance that helps flesh out Crysis 3's story, lore, and characters is found in audio recordings and data logs. This is very common in games, however I wish more of the interesting bits of information here could have been brought into the spotlight. Many of the details about the Ceph stages can only be obtained through these means. The biggest issue with these lore pickups is that they break the flow of gameplay. Whenever I found one, I'd parse the information in it immediately, as it's often contextual to the surroundings of where it's found. There is one spot where around 5 of these data logs can be found together, and I'm glad I took the time to read all of them. I just wish there was a better solution. Also, the audio logs require you to stay in the menu while you listen to them. I hate this. At least let me listen to them while I play the game. If there's one thing that Crysis games have always been known for, it's their visuals, and I want to take some time near the end here to discuss the various versions of Crysis 3 that have released. Even though Crysis 3 pushed the graphical boundaries of the era even further, the game was not locked to PC, as it was also launched on the Xbox 360 and PS3. These versions are brutally limited by the hardware, but it's always fun to look at the past and see the optimizations developers had to make for the game to run on these platforms. Accessing the original version of Crysis 3 on PC is a bit interesting. When the game's multiplayer servers shut down, the game was delisted from digital storefronts on consoles and on Steam. As a result, the only way to purchase and play the game now is through EA's desktop application. Having Xbox Game Pass Ultimate also gives you EA Play, granting you access to the game too. In 2021, Crysis 3 received a remaster alongside the series' other main entries. This brought the game back to PC and on storefronts like the Epic and Steam Store and modern consoles consoles including the Nintendo Switch. It's this remaster that I played all the way through on PC for this video. Beyond the upgraded visuals and removal of multiplayer elements, not much has changed. Around the launch of the remasters, I believe there was some performance issues, but now in 2024 the game runs great, and I had no problems maxing it out at 4K while hitting over 100 FPS. The multiplayer for Crysis 3 was live until late 2023 when the servers were shut down. I'm confident there are some dedicated fans working hard out there getting this element of the game back up and running. As for me, unlike with Crysis 1 and 2, I never touched the multiplayer in the third game. As such, I won't be talking about it, but if you'd share some of your memories with me regarding it in the comments below, I'd certainly read them. Now comes the time to place Crysis 3 on my tier list. If you watched my previous videos, you may notice the tier list looks a bit more granular. I broke up the B and C tiers into more distinct categories as they were getting quite crowded, and I needed a better way to distinguish games I feel of a similar ranking. Throughout this video, I've made countless comparisons between Crysis 2 and 3. There's clear iteration from 2 to 3, whereas with Crysis to Crysis 2, there was a far bigger shakeup in design and mechanics. On the gameplay front, Crysis 3 is a clear step up for my tastes. The story didn't need to be something too complex and serves well as a setup for some fun levels. The difficult part is, I don't share the same nostalgia for Crysis 3 as I do for 2. I never played Crysis 3 growing up, and for some damn reason, my original experience with Crysis 2 really sticks with me. It may sound unfair, but I think Crysis 2 and 3 are of a very similar quality, with the two trading blows on many fronts. As a result, Crysis 3 also lands on my B- tier. These two sequels are great fun, however neither stands the test of time like the original does. Let me know in the comments where you'd rank Crysis 3 on your tier list and in comparison to the other Crysis games. As it currently ranks, I'd put Crysis 1 on top, followed by 3, and with 2 in last place. I still have to play Crysis Warhead, and I'll definitely be making a video covering it too. If you want to make sure you don't miss it when it releases, be sure to subscribe. For now, that's everything. Have a great rest of your day and take care.